When you see a horror movie as a teenager, some creative kills and a few laughs are all you need for a good time. You aren't necessarily noticing through lines, deep lore, or mistakes, but the Final Destination franchise has some, if you're looking for them. It doesn't take long to figure out that the formless, faceless antagonist of Final Destination, Death, has a quirky little sense of humor. Traditional symbols of good luck get turned upside down throughout the series, and we mean that literally. In the fourth movie, The Final Destination, the character who's named Carter, but is referred to even in the credits as just racist, meets his end after the lucky horseshoe hanging from the rearview mirror on his tow truck falls, turning on the radio. That sets off a chain of events that includes the car locks, which are in the shape of another traditional symbol of luck, activating. It all ends with him being dragged behind the truck, on fire. Also, in The Final Destination, one of the four leads, Hunt, has a lucky coin. Death waits until after he drops and loses it down a pool drain before finally killing him with that same drain.
Hunt, will you give the lucky coin a rest, please?
A horseshoe also appears in Final Destination 2 as a ring of the character Evan, who has just won the lottery. He does seem to be having it pretty good until his head is impaled by a fire escape ladder. The newest entry in the series, Bloodlines, has plenty more lucky coins, and there's a prominent neon horseshoe shape in the tattoo shop in the scene where Eric gets hung by his nose piercing on a ceiling fan. That sounds actually disgusting. I do not want to watch that film. He actually survives, so maybe that one really is good luck. For a substance that's essential to human life and also absolutely everywhere, water is pretty extraordinarily dangerous in reality, so it's not a huge surprise that Death would make use of it in Final Destination, but it turns to water-based deaths a lot. We've already mentioned Hunt's pool death in the Final Destination, but in that same sequence, his ex, Janet, is nearly killed in a malfunctioning car wash, which is dumping water into her SUV. Also in that movie, one poor character who's stuck in the hospital is nearly electrocuted when water drips near some electrical devices and is then crushed by a falling bathtub. In the first Final Destination movie, a puddle of very blue water moves around Todd's bathroom floor, eventually causing him to slip and fall into the tub, where he's strangled by a clothesline. The protagonist of Final Destination 2, Kimberly, drives an ambulance into a lake to drown herself, but she's eventually resuscitated. Bloodlines has a similar drowning that doesn't turn out so well in the end. There's also a water-related fake-out in Final Destination 2. A fish gets caught in a filter, causing water to drip onto a plug and mess with the nitrous oxide in a dentist's office. But that's not what ultimately kills a teenager named Tim. A key aspect of the Final Destination films might be easy to overlook when you're a youngster just looking for a scare, but is much harder to ignore when you're an adult who's got some more life experience under your belt. Almost every movie has a scene where a piece of equipment malfunctions and kills people, but those things would probably never happen in reality.
Is that supposed to be happening?
Take, for example, one of the most memorable deaths in Final Destination 3, where two teenage girls, Ashlyn and Ashley, are burned to death while trying to get some synthetic rays at a tanning salon. Real-life tanning booths have emergency shut-off switches if the top gets stuck shut. Of course they would. In Final Destination 5, a character named Olivia goes in for LASIK surgery. The doctor leaves at one point, and that device also malfunctions, leading to the laser seriously burning her eye. Those machines also have fail-safes to prevent that, and the people behind LASIK.com took it so personally that they posted an article to debunk the scene's events, writing, "The truth is, LASIK is an extremely safe procedure with a very low complication rate. The risks involved are minor, and any potential side effects are generally mild and temporary. The idea that something could go fatally wrong during LASIK is pure fiction." We have to correct their correction though. It isn't a laser that kills Olivia, it's falling out of a window. Bloodlines likewise has a scene where an MRI machine malfunctions and becomes far more magnetic than is realistically possible, leading to another gruesome death. It is also being quickly debunked by experts who express concern that the scene would make people avoid MRIs. MRI safety expert Tobias Gilk told Health Imaging, "I would hope that every potential MRI patient who sees this disregards it as a piece of complete fiction." Of course, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why this keeps happening in the films. Death is a supernatural force that can make even machines with countermeasures fail. The first Final Destination establishes a pretty clear formula that the rest of the series follows, for the most part. A lead character has a vision of a horrific accident that kills them and lots of other people. They warn several of those people about it, saving their lives. But death comes after those survivors one by one, killing them in the order they would have died. The sequels immediately started tinkering with elements of that though. In Final Destination 2, death comes after the survivors of a highway crash in reverse order instead. It's explained in a sort of convoluted way that involves all those survivors having some connection to the survivors of Flight 180 from the first film.
That's why death is working backwards. It's tying up all the loose ends.
That movie also introduces the idea that only new life can defeat death, leading to what turns out to be a wild goose chase to ensure a pregnant woman gives birth. Final Destination 3 adds an element that isn't in any of the other movies, clues about how victims will die hidden in photographs. And in Final Destination 5, which is actually a prequel set before the first film, the characters learn about an out. If they kill someone, that person takes their place in death's plan, and they get whatever years of life their unfortunate victim had left. That idea returns in Bloodlines.
If you take a life, you get the time that person had left.
Perhaps that was part of the deal all along. But if so, it was a pretty jerk move for Tony Todd's William Bloodworth to only tell certain groups about it. You have to be a bit of a horror hound or cinephile to even notice this little Easter egg. Throughout the Final Destination franchise, characters have shared last names with some pretty prominent figures in horror film history, mostly directors. In just the first film, we have Alex Browning, named for the director of 1931's Dracula, Todd Browning. Billy Hitchcock shares a last name with legendary director Alfred Hitchcock, obviously. Todd Wagner is named after George Wagner, director of The Wolfman from 1941. Terry Chaney has the last name of Lon Chaney Sr. and Jr., who both played lots of movie monsters. Valerie Luton's name is very close to that of Val Luton, a prolific horror film producer. Larry Manow has the last name of F.W. Manow, the director of the original Nosferatu. There are even more in just that one movie. Not every character's last name throughout the series is a nod to a horror icon, but a whole lot of them are. To name just one, the protagonist of Final Destination 2 is Kimberly Corman, named for B-movie king Roger Corman. In Bloodlines, the family at the center of the story has the last name Campbell, which seems to be a reference to a more modern horror hero, actor Bruce Campbell from the Evil Dead franchise.
Groovy.
The first catastrophic event in the series is the explosion of Volare Airlines Flight 180, and very quickly, those digits come to symbolize Death's hand creeping in. Before the flight even happens, Alex's alarm clock momentarily glitches out and reads 180. At the end of the film, a piece of a falling sign for a restaurant called Le Café Miro 81 turns upside down, briefly reading as 180. In Final Destination 5, the lead character Sam also works at a Le Café Miro 81 location. In Final Destination 2, the big highway crash happens near a sign that says next 180 feet. A subway train at the end of Final Destination 3 is number 081. And in The Final Destination, the section of a racetrack where the inciting accident happens is section 180. Those are just a few examples. It's never really explained why those numbers are so important, but one fan theory is that 180 signifies how so often the deaths are surprises, a complete turnaround of the audience's expectations. The number 23 also comes up several times, like Clea sitting in row 23 in the first film. The pile-up in Final Destination 2 occurs on Route 23, and there's a road sign that states the next service station is in 23 miles. The first Final Destination movie has a sort of theme song for several of its deaths, Rocky Mountain High by John Denver. It plays just before several death scenes, and Alex even remarked about Denver's real-life death.
During a plane crash.
Final Destination 2 also uses that song, but just once in an elevator. Final Destination 5 uses Dust in the Wind by Kansas as its death theme. The rest of the series opts for more iconic death-predicting songs and overall themes. Highway to Hell by AC/DC plays before the big wreck in the second movie. The third movie deploys Love Roller Coaster by the Ohio Players after its roller coaster crash. The fourth jokingly plays Why Can't We Be Friends as Carter is dragged to death. Bloodlines opens with two meaningful needle drops. When Iris and Paul arrive at the doomed Skyview restaurant, Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire plays on the radio, which soon becomes a reality once an explosion makes it into a literal ring of fire. Later, the radio plays Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head by B.J. Thomas, right when people fall from the sky. Final Destination 3 has quite a few intriguing ideas the rest of the franchise doesn't really explore. There's an undercurrent throughout the movie of presidential assassinations. This is most obvious in a scene where the protagonist, Wendy, is showing historical photos she purports to predict major historical tragedies. One of those is of Abraham Lincoln, supposedly showing where he would be shot. But dig a little deeper and there's more. Wendy lives in a town called McKinley and goes to McKinley High School. William McKinley was another president who was assassinated. At the end of the movie, Wendy is on a subway train with with some very ominous names for stops. Not only is there a McKinley stop, but there are also Booth and Oswald stops, named for John Wilkes Booth, who killed Lincoln, and Lee Harvey Oswald, John F. Kennedy's assassin. Pause to look closer, and you'll see even more historically horrific names, though they're not all presidential assassins. There's McVeigh for Timothy McVeigh, who carried out the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. There's a Chapman stop for Mark David Chapman, who killed John Lennon. Bundy is for serial killer Ted Bundy. Gein for another serial killer, Ed Gein. There's both a Jim Jones and a Jonestown transfer, named for cult leader Jim Jones and his Jonestown massacre. And there are more cult leaders named, including David Koresh and Marshall Applewhite. When you're trying to keep all your 180s in order, you might mess up some of your other math. That seems to have happened in Final Destination 2, where a news report states regarding the anniversary of the Flight 180 crash,
"It's a disaster that's affected many, none more so than Mount Abraham High School, which lost 40 students and 4 faculty members in the crash."
But with Alex's premonition, 6 students and 1 teacher left the plane, meaning that only 34 students and 3 faculty members died in the plane explosion. It's possible the newscaster got the information wrong because Alex and everyone else did board the plane, so the airline's records might have shown that they were still on board when it exploded. However, the newscaster then discusses how the students who avoided the catastrophe died in increasingly convoluted ways, so it feels like he and the screenwriters probably should have done a bit more research to get their facts straight.